we're back, and let's go ahead and talk about different types of aging. There is primary aging, which is going to be all the changes that are universal changes, everything that happens to all of us. These are changes that are irreversible. These are things that happen and you can't really fix them, you can't really go back. And they are things that are just normal. There's no escaping it, right? It's just aging. So for example, hair going gray or skin getting wrinkly. Now, are there things we could do to make it look like that didn't happen? Well, yeah, but I'm talking about there's nothing you can do to fix it. There's nothing that will actually make it not have happened or return you back to where you were before it happened. So while we can cover your gray hair, we can't actually fix the fact that your hair's gone gray, things like that. Secondary aging are things that are not necessarily universal. These are things that are going to happen because of illnesses that you've experienced across your lifespan. These are going to be things that are chronic conditions like diabetes or some other kind of, multiple sclerosis or some other kind of chronic illness that is with you for a period of time. And these are oftentimes going to be attributable to habits, not all of them, but oftentimes due to habits. They might be due to genes. So these are things that we may differ on because we've inherited different genetic potentials and, just standard individual variation. Even if you've got a particular gene code, you may have done stuff in your lifetime that helped to protect you from the effects of that gene code. So that's what we're talking about with secondary aging. Primary aging is universal, happens to everybody. Secondary aging, that's where we get the variations between people and we can see differences in how successfully different people are aging. So I wanted to talk a little bit about cardiovascular disease because it's a really great example of primary and secondary aging. It's a disease that involves the heart and the circulatory system. So you can have cardiovascular disease and your symptom is that you had a clogged artery in your calf muscle, right? It can be very, set in your extremities, but that can be a sign that there's plaque in other parts of your arteries or something like that. It can have to do with how your heart's functioning. There are a lot of things that go into you've had a stroke. There's a lot of things that go under the category of cardiovascular disease. So here's a list of things that, different kinds of diseases, and then I thought I'd highlight the ones that are related to cardiovascular disease. So heart disease, stroke, arterial sclerosis, that's hardening of the arteries. So those are all examples of things that are related to cardiovascular disease. What this chart is doing is showing us the death rates of people who are over age 65 relative to the rates of death for people who are under age 65 for each of these different categories. So for example, if you look at the suicide bar, you'll see that it's only twice as likely among people over 65 as it is for people under 65. So accidents, only twice as likely for people over 65 than it is for people under. So you can see that those are the kinds of things that are really going to be individual variation. Whereas if we're going to be looking at something that is much more universal, we're going to be looking at something like cardiovascular disease, where you see that, let's look at arteriosclerosis. If you are over age 65, you have 10 times the likelihood of having arteriosclerosis than a person who's under that age. So it's clearly related to aging. Heart disease, you have 9 times the likelihood. A stroke, you have 8 times the likelihood if you're over 65 than you do if you're under. Now, if you look at pneumonia flu, you might be saying, wow, you have 9 times the likelihood if you're over 65. That has to do with aging also. Absolutely. That has to do with aging because as we age, we become more vulnerable to the kinds of things that go along with the flu turning into pneumonia in particular. And that has to do with lifestyle as well as aging issues. But heart disease is cardiovascular disease is a really good example of how it's clearly related to aging, but it's also tied to other lifestyle factors. So let's talk about that a little bit. Even though it's so much more common for cardiovascular disease to occur among people who are over 65, it's considered secondary aging. That's because none of the following things make it certain that you will develop CVD. Your age does not guarantee you're going to develop cardiovascular disease. Smoking does not guarantee that you'll get it. Being inactive doesn't guarantee you'll get it. Having hypertension, which is high blood pressure, does not guarantee that you're going to get it. One of the things that's really important to note, though, is that if a person has one of these risk factors, they tend to have at least two. So it's more likely that a person who's over age 65 is also inactive, or that they also smoked when they were younger, or maybe are continuing to smoke now, or that they also have hypertension, or they might have all of these things. So that's the thing that makes it secondary aging, because it's not just age alone that would cause this. There's a confluence of things. Age is the best predictor of cardiovascular disease, that's for sure. A 90-year-old is 1,000 times more likely to die of cardiovascular disease than a person who otherwise is completely identical but is 30. So instead of having, 3 times the likelihood because they're 3 times as old, it's 1,000 times more likely that a 90-year-old will die of cardiovascular disease. And, almost all 90-year-olds have at least one of these diseases I've listed here: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or dementia. Almost all 90-year-olds have at least one of those things, whereas less than half of people between the ages of 65 and 89 do. So as we age, those things become more common, but just the act of aging is not enough to cause them. So that's why they're not considered primary aging, they're considered secondary. So mentioning a lot of things that happen with age, we do see that as people age, they tend to compensate for things that start to change. So we call this selective optimization with compensation. So by compensating for their changes, they can actually optimize their functioning in certain areas. So for example, as we age, we see some sleep changes. It turns out that older people get the same amount of sleep as younger people, according to the National Sleep Foundation, but they spend more time in bed in an effort to get those same number of hours of sleep. They tend to take longer to fall asleep than a younger person does. They wake more often during the night. If you hook them up to a EEG, you'll see that they return to consciousness several times a night, whereas a younger person might return to consciousness once or twice during the night. People who are older tend to feel drowsy more often during the daytime. They're more likely to fall asleep unexpectedly during the daytime, which indicates that they're drowsy. So what older people do to compensate for the fact that they maybe are getting less effective sleep is they go ahead and commit more time to it. They may go ahead and say, you know what, I need a nap in the afternoon. And they go ahead and they take a nap in the afternoon, and so that they can sort of get over that drowsiness and get back to full functioning. So they tend to compensate for these changes that they experience. And maybe that's how come in the National Sleep Foundation study, it looks like they get the same amount of sleep as they're compensating for these difficulties that they're having. What about driving changes? It turns out that people over the age of 65 have the fewest accidents of any age group. This is the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And they keep track of all the accidents that happen and who was the driver and all those things. And people who are over 65 have fewer accidents than any other age group, even though they've got slower reaction time and difficulties with vision and other kinds of things we'll talk about in a second. But again, they compensate in order to selectively optimize. So they drive more slowly. And younger people oftentimes get really frustrated with older people. They're like, come on, grandma, speed up. You're blocking traffic. Well, you know what? I'm driving more slowly because I know my reactions are more slow. Oftentimes they'll avoid driving after dark because they realize that their vision isn't as good. Or they may say, I don't like to drive in the rain anymore because they realize their reactions are not as quick. They might just stop driving altogether. They might say, you know what? I don't think I can compensate for this stuff anymore. I'm going to ask my daughter to drive me around. I'm going to get the neighbor to take me someplace. So these compensations allow them to avoid the accidents that they might have had if they were less likely to make changes in their behaviors. So morbidity is the incidence or prevalence of a disease or of all diseases in a population. So we might look for the morbidity rate pertaining to diabetes. So that would be the incidence or prevalence of a disease, diabetes. Or we might say, how likely is this group of people to have any kind of disease? And so that would be of all diseases in a population. Okay. What we've been seeing over the past 50 years is what we call compression of morbidity. What that refers to is the shortening of a person's time spent ill or infirm, needing to be completely cared for in a nursing home or needing to be hospitalized frequently or those kinds of things. We're seeing a shortening of how much time people are spending in that condition in their elder years. And so that means that we're postponing chronic illnesses a lot longer. So by recognizing them earlier and maybe taking medicine for them or having some kind of surgery or whatever earlier on, it delays the onset of more serious symptoms. So you can postpone chronic illnesses. You can put off acute illnesses like cancer or something that can come in and really ravage a person. You can postpone that through screening and dealing with small outcrops rather than waiting for the big thing. We also see that we have improved lifestyle factors. I've got this nice picture of this couple going for their power walk. And, like I mentioned earlier, today's elders are much more aware of the impact of lifestyle on health. So they're exercising, they're eating better, they're avoiding toxins, they're doing things that are really healthy for them. And then we have better medicines available, so you can manage high blood pressure better or diabetes better and things like that. And of course, technological aids like apps that will remind people that it's time to check their blood sugar, or it's time to make that appointment with their doctor, or to request their stool sample kit, or whatever it is. We have these technological aids that really make it more likely that people will follow up with their health. There's those new ones where you can put your finger on your phone and they can check to see whether you're actually experiencing afibrillation. And if you are, then what to do for it. And so we've gotten a lot better at being able to diagnose, treat, and help people so that they don't have to have things become big diseases. So as a result, what we're seeing is that most elderly are at big risk. Most of them are in that young old category that we were talking about before. Okay, but there are age-related changes. These are like primary aging for most of us. As our senses start to change with age. Vision. I've been showing you this chart all quarter, and you'll notice that we have reached into that plateau period for vision, and you just see this drop off a cliff where you see the proportion of normal 20/20 vision when identifying letters on an eye chart. Very few 90-year-olds can, right? We're seeing less than 25% performance. So most people in their elder years will need glasses of some sort. Only about 10% of people over the age of 65 don't need glasses. So that's really, and not, now more people are not wearing glasses these days because of contacts or LASIK surgery. I'm not saying that. I'm saying people don't need correction, and only about 10% of people don't need correction, either for distant vision or for close-up, or sometimes both. Common vision problems as we age, cataracts. On the left, we have normal clear lens, and on the right, what looks like maybe it could just be a reflection is actually clouding, that it is caused by a cataract. So what's happening to that person's vision is it's looking blurry. It seems like everything's really dim. Glaucoma is you can get this when you're younger, but it's a very common with aging kind of eye change, where you're getting more pressure inside of your eyeball. That can actually damage your optic nerve over time. So you're getting too much fluid building up in the eyeball and causing too much pressure. Macular degeneration is a disease where the cells that surround the fovea, which is the point of fixation, get damaged. There we are. Get damaged. And so if you look on the right-hand side picture of the building, you see that there's that black spot. That's what it would look like to the person who has macular degeneration, is that they would have parts of their visual field, like whatever they're actually looking at, that would actually be black or blur. And that's because part of their retina is dying. With hearing, we started to see declining hearing earlier in adulthood. By the age of 70, we're looking at a lot of people who are having difficulty identifying spoken words. A lot of times people will preserve their ability to hear like a little tone. They'll be able to raise their finger and say, yeah, I heard that. But when they listen to people speaking, they'll have difficulty discriminating words that could sound alike. If there's no context provided, that's when it really becomes clear that they're having difficulty hearing. Hearing aids are getting a lot smaller these days. When I was a kid, my great-grandma had to wear hearing aids that were giant, and they had these batteries that would go dead. She couldn't hear it, but the hearing aid would be squealing, and it was just so horrible. And today they have, these are actually pictures of pretty big hearing aids. Today they have ones that go inside the ear canal and are hardly visible and work really well. A lot of people will wait really too long before they go get a hearing aid, so that they've gone for quite a while not hearing. And when they get the hearing aid, all of a sudden it seems like there's just so much noise and it's so distracting. And they'll say, oh, I can't take it. There's just, it amplifies the background noise. Well, all of us have amplified background noise when we hear normally. What's different is that a person who is used to hearing noise learns how to pay attention to the things that they want to hear and ignore the things that they don't want to hear. And so it's, as soon as a person starting to have hearing deficits is actually the best time to go get a hearing aid, because they still are accustomed to tuning out the things that they don't want to hear and focusing on the things that you want. Don't want to get into the habit of not having to hear the background noise. Without proper hearing, you see that people start to detach from conversations. They're embarrassed to say what, or they can see that people are getting frustrated with them because they keep saying what. They find that younger speakers will sort of yell inappropriately instead of just speaking more clearly. Or they'll use baby talk, elder speak, right, where the demeaning way of speaking to an older person. Older people are less likely to experience stereotype threat, this fear of fulfilling the picture of an older person who can't hear, when they have positive relationships with younger generation members. So grandparents who have positive relationship with their grandchildren are less likely to feel like it's a personal failing or that people are really going to judge them than people who don't know younger people and who feel like the younger people who, if they knew I didn't hear well, they'd think, oh, see, well, that's just because you're old. I have a colleague who I love how he handles his hearing aids, because I saw him giving a speech and somebody in the audience asked a question and he said, what? And then he moved forward, she said it again. And so he said, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see, but I have a hearing aids because I can't hear very well, so I'm going to have to ask you to speak really clearly. And I thought, well, I thought he handled it really well. He's, very much elderly, and, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can tell, but I have hearing aids. I thought it was just a really nice way of handling it. And he has lots of positive relationships with younger people because he continues to teach college and he has grad students. And it's just, I thought he handled it really well, and maybe he doesn't experience the fear that they're going to think he's an old doddering man if he can't hear. So anyway, other senses, again, you've seen these pictures across the border. Here we had been in that nice plateau across adulthood for being able to identify smells, and then again just jumping off a cliff in our older age. We have difficulty recognizing smells, which can have big impacts on taste. If you can't smell very well, you can't really pick up odors of coffee or steak or other things that blueberries that are sweet and sour and then have all this flavor that comes from the smell. You can't pick up the smell. It just ruins food. And so losing some of your smell acuteness is really problematic for enjoying food and things like that. She does not look like she wants to eat that, right? I thought I'd touch on that biggest growing group of people, the centenarians. Found this guy on the internet. We see people like him who, he's a little bendy and he's over 100, and you think, well, obviously he's doing something right. Well, you know what? The number one best predictor of living to 100 is your genes. So, of course, we don't get to pick those things. So all we can focus in on are the lifestyle factors. So diet is one of them. Not being significantly overweight is a big factor in living to 100. It's not necessarily the case that calorie restriction diet that we talked about in the last segment would be helpful. I don't know whether that is or not, but not being significantly overweight. What you eat is important. Having productive work to do, having something meaningful to do every day, even though you're older. Don't say to yourself, yay, I'm retired, I can just sit and stare now, right? Like having something to do. Being engaged with your family and your community are big things. Being involved and interested in your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, kids at church and the people at church, or at your pinochle club, or whatever, being involved, volunteering, things like that. Exercising, but also getting relaxation, right? Taking a nap in the afternoon if you feel like taking a nap. These factors are all associated with long life. So these are all important things for all of us to practice. All right, well, I will see you next time to discuss cognitive development in late adulthood.